Let me tell you the thing almost nobody says out loud. The LSAT is not a logic test. It's not about memorizing fallacies or spotting argument types or diagramming conditionals like you're auditioning for CSI Logic Edition. The LSAT is a reading test. That's it. Can you read dense, technical, boring writing and still understand it? Can you read fast without getting sloppy? Can you stay focused when the topic is something like post-structuralist interpretations of antitrust jurisprudence in 19th century England? Didn't think so. That's what separates high scorers from everybody else. Not who knows more logic, not who did more drills, who reads better. And by better, I don't mean faster. I mean more precisely, more carefully, more actively. Like a lawyer reading a contract with a $100,000 clause buried on page 19. Now, here's the kicker. Most people taking the LSAT have no idea they're being tested on reading. They think they're prepping for some abstract logic puzzle, and then they wonder why their score stays stuck in the low 160s. So, what do? They double down. More drills, more blind review, more breakdowns of why B is wrong and D is right. And all of that is fine, but it's not the root problem. The real problem is that they never learned how to read the way the LSAT demands. Let me explain. There are different kinds of reading. You read text messages from your friends, you read tweets, you skim articles while you're watching Netflix, and that kind of reading is fine for real life. But the LSAT isn't real life. The LSAT is unforgiving. Every word matters. The tone matters. The structure matters. If you miss a single word, like unless, some, or not, you're done. What this test really wants to know is, can you read with total focus, spot the exact logic being used, and resist the urge to assume anything that isn't on the page? That's it. Now, when we work with students, we see this all the time. Someone comes along scoring 158. They've done every prep book, drilled every question, and they're still stuck. We fix their reading. We retrain how they interact with the text, chunk by chunk, phrase by phrase, until every word clicks. And suddenly, they jump up to a 167, 172, then 175. Not because they're smarter, not because they found some secret hack, but because they finally understood what the test was actually asking. Now, of course, this is not a guarantee of your results. Yours may vary, but this shows what's possible when you adopt the new mindset that you are not just prepping for a logic test. You're training yourself to read like a lawyer, slow, focused, and precise. And that shift alone can unlock 10, 20, even 30 points. No gimmicks, just a new way of looking at what the LSAT really is. Now, let's get brutally honest for a second. You think you already know how to read, and to be fair, why wouldn't you? You read books in school. You scroll through social media every day. You read emails, articles, maybe even a few actual books that don't have pictures. But that kind of reading is passive reading. It's skim the surface and move on kind of reading. Good enough to get the gist. And that kind of reading fails you on the LSAT. Here's what LSAT reading is like. Imagine someone gave you a 10-line contract full of legal jargon, ambiguous clauses, and buried loopholes. And then they said, you've got 84 seconds to read this, interpret it precisely, and answer a trick question about it. Ready? Go. That's the LSAT. It's fast, it's dense, and it's designed to fool casual readers. Let's do the math. 35 minutes per section, about 25 questions, which works out to 1 minute and 24 seconds per question. And each one includes a stimulus, a question stem, and 5 answer choices. That's like being asked to read a short op-ed, spot the logical flaw, then choose the best response out of 5 lawyer-written options in under a minute and a half. So, What do most people do? They rush. And when you rush on this test, you don't just miss a little bit, you miss everything. You miss the word only, or some, or not. And now you're confidently choosing the wrong answer. Not because you're bad at logic, but because you were skimming instead of reading. And this test is booby-trapped with precision errors. Most is not the same as all. Some is not the same as many. And unless flips the whole logic of the sentence. And if you haven't trained your brain to notice that in real time, the LSAT will eat you alive. That's why one of the first things we do with students is force them to slow down. We retrain how they read, line by line, phrase by phrase. And yeah, it feels weird at first. One student said it felt like trying to read underwater. But after a week or two, they stop glossing over words. They start seeing the structure, and they actually understand what they're reading before the question. And suddenly, they're getting questions right. Not because they eliminated 4 choices, but because they already knew what the answer had to be. That's what real reading looks like. And if you're stuck at a plateau right now, that's probably the exact skill you need to fix. Now let's talk about the LSAT section that gives people the most anxiety, reading comprehension. You finish logical reasoning and you feel pretty solid. Then reading comp hits and it's like trying to read molasses through a straw. Students tell me all the time, Steve, I can get logical reasoning right, but reading comp just wrecks me. And I get it. Reading comp feels harder, but it's actually not. In fact, it is the most predictable section on the test. The passage types are consistent, the question types are consistent, and the traps are consistent. So, why does it feel harder? Because it's longer, vaguer, and way easier to misread. Let's break it down. The passages are long. You're not reading 3 sentences, you're reading 5 paragraphs. That's a lot of room for your brain to get tired, distracted, or just kind of float off. And the questions are subtle. They're not asking, what did the author say? They're asking things like, what role does paragraph 2 play in the development of the author's claim about mid-20th century sociolinguistic trends? Cool. Thanks for that, LSAC. And worst of all, when you get one wrong, it's hard to figure out why. In logical reasoning, the mistake is usually right there in the stimulus. But in reading comp, you might have misunderstood a single word 3 paragraphs ago, and now the wrong answer feels right. That's what makes reading comp dangerous. Not that it's harder, but that it's murkier. And that's why people spin their wheels doing dozens of passages and still stay stuck. Because they're practicing the same shaky reading habits over and over. So here's what we have students do instead. We have them break down the passage paragraph by paragraph. We have you paraphrase each one in your own words. And you ask, what's the author's tone? What changed from the last paragraph? And we have you track structural signals like however, by contrast, therefore, and for example. This turns reading comp from a blur of dense information into a structured argument you can navigate. You start to see the logic of the passage. You start predicting what the next paragraph will say. And when you hit the questions, you're no longer guessing. You already know where the answer is coming from. And yeah, it's slower at first, but remember that speed is a byproduct of understanding. You get faster by getting better, not the other way around. So if reading comp feels like a nightmare, you're not bad at reading, you just haven't trained the right kind of reading yet. So let's say you get an LSAT passage about climate change. You've read a few articles, you follow the science, you even wrote a paper about carbon offsets in undergrad. So you start reading and think, oh, I know this, I got this. Nope, that's a trap. The LSAT loves to use vaguely familiar sounding topics, but they twist the logic just enough to throw you off. And when you bring in what you know, what you believe, or what you remember from a textbook 3 years ago, you stop reading what's actually on the page. Now, you're filling in blanks the author didn't write. You're assuming things that were never said. And you're judging the argument based on real-world facts, not the LSAT's version of reality. And that's how you get wrong answers that feel right. We see this with smart students all the time, especially in science, economics, and law-related passages. They know just enough to be dangerous. So here's the rule we give our students. Kill your prior knowledge. Whatever the topic is, economics, philosophy, game theory, linguistics, read it like you've never seen it before. Treat every sentence as brand new information. Use only what the passage gives you. No assumptions, no outside facts, no trying to fill in the gaps with what you think should be there. It's hard at first, especially if you're the kind of person who's used to being right. But on the LSAT, being right based on outside knowledge doesn't help you. Being precise based on the passage does. Now, let me give you one of the most useful frameworks for LSAT reading, something we teach early on in our coaching programs. It's this. You need 2 modes of reading for the LSAT. Not 1, but 2. And most students use only 1, and that's why they get stuck. The first mode is what I call microscope mode. This is your zoomed in reading. You're dissecting the sentence, phrase by phrase, word by word. You're watching for some versus most, unless versus only if, cause versus correlation, and necessary versus sufficient. You're treating every word like it could cost you a point, because it can. This is what you use for logical reasoning stimuli, confusing reading comp sentences, flaw questions and assumption questions, and anything with conditional logic. Microscope mode is where you're focused on precision. In contrast, we have mode number 2, telescope mode. This is your zoomed out reading. This is where you are not sweating every single word, you're just following the big picture. This is where you ask, what's the author's main point? What role does this paragraph play? How is the argument unfolding? And what's the tone or attitude? This is what you use for reading comp passages, structure-based reading comp questions, and main point, inference, and tone questions. Telescope mode is where you're focused on the structure. Now, here's where it gets fun. The best test takers don't just know these 2 modes, but they switch between them effortlessly. They're reading a passage in telescope mode, then they hit a phrase like, however, this conclusion may be misleading, and bam, they switch to microscope mode. That's a red flag. Time to slow down and dissect. Or they're reading a dense logical reasoning stimulus and they realize, oh, this is just background. No need to decode it word for word. So they zoom out, telescope style, and focus on the actual argument. And this ability to shift gears at the right moment is a game changer. Most students either zoom in too far and get lost in the weeds, or they stay zoomed out and they miss all the logical traps. You need both. Microscope mode sharpens your logic. Telescope mode builds your map. You train them separately, then learn to toggle between them instinctively. And once you do that, reading becomes easier, faster, and more accurate. Because now, you're not just reading the LSAT, you're reading it in the way it was designed to be read. Now, let me teach you a technique that every high scorer eventually learns, even if they don't have a name for it. I call this sandpaper reading. Why? Because it feels rough, slow, and awkward, like dragging sandpaper across your brain. And that's how you know it's working. Here's what sandpaper reading means. You read a small chunk of the sentence, maybe 3 to 6 words. You stop, you paraphrase it in your own words. Then, and only then, do you move on to the next chunk. You are not reading sentence by sentence. You are reading thought unit by thought unit. It's like building a wall, brick by brick, not trying to stack the whole thing at once and hoping it doesn't collapse. Let me show you how this works in practice. Take this LSAT style sentence. Quote, since economic sanctions typically fail to change a nation's policies unless enforced multilaterally, here's what most people do. They read the whole thing, kind of absorb it, then move on. Then they hit the choices and think, wait, what did that sentence actually say? But with sandpaper reading, here's what it looks like. Since economic sanctions. Okay, this part is giving a reason, probably a premise. Next part, typically fail to change a nation's policies. So they're saying sanctions usually don't work. Got it. Quote, unless enforced multilaterally. Exception: sanctions can work, but only if a bunch of countries do it together. That's it. Short chunks, quick paraphrasing, move on only once you've nailed the meaning. And yes, it does feel really slow at first. Students tell us, it feels like I'm reading in slow motion. I'll never finish a section like this. Totally normal feeling. But here's what actually happens. You spend a few extra seconds up front understanding the sentence and save 10 times that time later when you don't have to reread, don't get tripped up by the choices, and don't second guess yourself. You read once and you read right. That's the secret. Sandpaper reading trains your brain to process the LSAT's dense, logical style on the first try. And once it clicks, you'll wonder how you ever read any other way. Now let me paint you a familiar scene. You finish reading a logical reasoning stimulus. It kinda made sense and you're feeling okay. Then you look at the choices and your brain immediately goes, wait, what the hell did that just say? So now you're rereading, you're second guessing, you're eliminating answers based on vibes. Why'd this happen? Because you never owned the meaning of what you just read. You skimmed it, you kinda got it, but you didn't lock it in. That's why paraphrasing is the most underrated LSAT skill. It's the difference between reading words and actually understanding what they mean. Here's how to do it. Anytime you read a sentence, stop and ask, can I say this in plain English? Not LSAT-ese, not logic class jargon, just normal everyday language. Let's take an example. Quote, only if the government subsidizes renewable energy will fossil fuel dependence decline. Paraphrased, fossil fuel use won't go down unless the government helps out with renewables. Boom. Now you understand the structure. You see the necessary condition. You didn't just read it, you translated it. That's paraphrasing. And it's not just for logical reasoning. In reading comp, we have our students paraphrase each paragraph in 1 to 2 sentences, the author's attitude in 3 words, and transitions like however and thus as shift incoming or conclusion coming. And yes, in the beginning, we often have our students write it down. Not forever, of course, but in the early phase, it helps make the skill automatic. You don't need to summarize entire passages. You just need to process meaning in real time. And here's the surprising part. Once you start paraphrasing mid-sentence, something weird happens. You stop rereading because you're actually understanding as you go, not guessing afterward. It's like watching a movie with subtitles in your own brain. And you start noticing how much clearer the logic is when you slow down and translate. So next time you catch yourself zoning out or feeling, I think I got it, stop. Don't move forward until you can say it in your own words. That's the difference between kinda got it and score-raising clarity. Now let's talk about the most dangerous words on the LSAT. Not hegemonic, not disenfranchisement, not the vocab words you'd need to impress your professor. I'm talking about those tiny, boring words. The ones that look harmless, the ones you might normally skim right over. Words like always, never, some, most, unless, and only if. These are what I call micro words, and they have the power to completely flip the logic of an argument. We tell students this all the time. You can diagram conditionals all day, but if you miss a word like only, the whole thing falls apart. So let's break down a few of them, and I want you to see just how subtle the differences really are. Always means every single time, no exceptions. Never means 0 times. Not rarely, not almost never, but 0. Some means at least 1. Could be 1, could be all. Most means more than half. Not nearly all, and not all. Just anything more than half. Unless means you flip the conditions and it equals if not. Only if introduces a necessary condition, what must be true. So let's do a quick example. Quote, The company will succeed only if it expands internationally. Translation: if the company doesn't expand internationally, it will not succeed. So you see that? It's a tiny phrase, only if, but it tells you which part of the sentence is required. If you miss it, you might walk away thinking international expansion is optional. It's not. This is why we push students to underline or highlight these micro words on every single question when they're training, because the LSAT uses these words strategically. They know that most people gloss over them. They know if they swap most with some, more than half of students won't even notice. They know that adding the word not changes everything, and people will still choose the wrong answer with confidence. So, what do? We teach students to read the way a lawyer reads a contract, word by word, clause by clause, because these tiny words are legal landmines. They might not look dangerous, but step on one and your whole argument explodes. Let me guess what you've been told. You need to simulate test day, do timed sections, build stamina, and sure, that has some truth to it, but here's the part no one says. If you try to train at game day speed before you've built the skill, you just reinforce bad habits. It's like trying to run a marathon before learning how to run without tripping over your shoelaces. We see this with students all the time. They're taking full sections every other day, but they're just practicing the same mistakes over and over, and they wonder why their scores don't move. So here's what we tell them. The test is the performance. Practice is for getting better. That means breaking things down, going slow, and isolating skills. It means training like an athlete. Top athletes don't just scrimmage all day. They do drills, work on mechanics, focus on weaknesses, and then test it all under pressure. You should be doing the same. So here is a 4-week progressive reading training plan where you start slow, build precision, then add speed. Week 1 is devoted to skill building. You do one untimed reading comp passage every other day. You paraphrase each paragraph out loud or in writing. You highlight all micro words, and you ID the author's main point and tone. Zero pressure on time at this stage, total focus on comprehension. Then in week 2, you combine passages. You do 2 untimed passages back to back. You ID the structure, background, argument, evidence, and counterpoint. Then you write 1-sentence summaries for each paragraph. Still untimed, but start noticing your natural pacing. Then week 3, we graduate to timed workouts. You're doing a full section under timed conditions. But here's the key. Deep review afterwards. What'd you misread? What word or structure tripped you up? What could you have paraphrased even better? Then finally, week 4, back-to-back endurance. 2 timed sections in a row, could be reading comp, followed by logical reasoning, for example. You focus on stamina and recovery between sections. Still review for comprehension gaps, not just what answer was right, but why your brain missed it. This kind of training builds muscle memory. Your brain starts picking up structure, logic, tone, and trap words without effort. And the best part is, you're not just practicing under pressure, you're getting better every time. So stop grinding through full sections like you're cramming for a history test. Train like a lawyer. Train like an athlete. Build the skill first, then test it. Now, let me blow up a myth real quick. Reading comp is about reading, logical reasoning is about logic. That is wrong. Logical reasoning is reading comprehension, just in smaller bites. Each logical reasoning question is a miniature reading comp passage, 1 paragraph long, super dense, and full of hidden traps. So here's what we tell students. If you want to get better at logical reasoning, train it like reading comp. And yes, that means bringing all your reading tools into logical reasoning. Sandpaper reading, paraphrasing, and zooming in on micro words. Now here's a drill we give students early on in coaching that changes the game fast. You pick 5 logical reasoning questions, just 5. And for each question, write out the stimulus slowly, phrase by phrase, and circle all the micro words, most, only if, unless, and so on. Then Paraphrase the stimulus in plain English. Keep the logic intact. Don't dumb it down, just make it clear. Think of it like translating lawyer speak to roommate speak. Then write out the question stem and paraphrase that also. Ask, what is this really asking me to do? Then rewrite all 5 choices in your own words, even the bad ones. This will show you how they disguise wrong answers to sound right. Then pick your answer and explain why it's right and why each other choice is wrong. If that sounds like overkill, it is. That's the point. This is not test day mode. This is build the muscle mode. You're not trying to be fast. You're trying to be precise. And if you do this drill, even just a few times a week, here's what happens. You start recognizing logical structure faster. You spot assumptions and flaws before reading the question stem. You become immune to trap answer phrasing. And you stop needing to eliminate because you already know the right answer when you see it. This is how high scorers train. Not by blasting through 40 questions a day, but by slowing down, breaking things apart, and building rock-solid reading habits that work in every section of the test. Now let's talk about something no one likes to admit. You're in the middle of a section, logical reasoning, reading comp, doesn't matter, and you hit a wall. You're reading a stimulus or a paragraph and think, wait, what? I don't get this at all. Now you're sweating. You reread it, doesn't help. You look at the question, now you're even more confused. You glance at the choices, now everything looks like it might be right, or definitely wrong, or both. Welcome to the LSAT panic spiral. And let me be totally clear. This is normal. It happens to everyone, even people scoring 175 and above. What matters isn't whether it happens, it's what you do next. Here's the rule we give our students. When in doubt, skip and reset. Seriously, just skip the question and move on. Because once your brain slips into fight or flight mode, once it thinks, I'm falling behind, I'm going to bomb this, you're not reading anymore. You're not thinking logically. You're just flailing around. So the absolute best thing you can do is break the spiral. Here's the exact protocol we teach. First, you pause for 3 seconds. Literally stop, put your pencil down, take 1 slow breath. Then flag and skip the question. Don't linger. Don't convince yourself you need just 1 more read. Just flag it and go. Then refocus on the next question. Give it a clean slate. Don't drag your panic into the next one, and return later, if you have time, with fresh eyes. You would be shocked how much easier it feels after 10 minutes and a brain reset. And this is not about giving up. This is about preserving your mental energy for the rest of the section. We've seen students waste 6 full minutes on a single reading comp question, then rush the next 3 and miss all of them. That's not a timing issue, that's a spiral. High scorers don't avoid hard questions. They manage them. They know when to pause, reset, and come back with a clear head. So the next time you feel stuck, don't panic. Just follow the protocol. Because the real damage isn't getting a question wrong. The real damage is letting 1 bad moment sabotage 5 more. Now, if you've ever wondered, what are the people who score 170 plus actually doing differently? It's not that they're smarter, it's not that they've memorized every flaw type, and it's definitely not that they're doing 10 hours of practice a day. The biggest difference is that they take every single word seriously. That's it. It sounds small, but it's massive. Let me explain. Most people skim. They read quickly, assume they mostly get it, then try to logic their way through the choices. Top scorers don't do that. They slow down even when they're moving fast. They don't hope they understood something, they verify. They read a sentence and ask, did I really know what that word meant here? What's the function of this phrase? Is this a necessary condition? A sufficient one? A trap? They read like lawyers read contracts, not because they're trying to be perfect, but because they know how easy it is to get tripped up by 1 little word. We had 1 student coming to us scoring a 165, aiming for a top 14 school. Super sharp, great logic, but she kept making tiny reading errors. We had her slow down, paraphrase, circle micro words, treat the stimulus like it was hiding a trick in plain sight. And once she started doing that, boom, 174. No extra tricks, no marathon study sessions, just a shift in how she read the test. And of course, that is not a guarantee you will see similar results. Your mileage may vary, but I shared this story to show you what's possible when you're willing to slow down and change your approach. So here's your takeaway. If you want to score in the 170s, it's not about speed. It's not even about logic. It's about respecting the words. You slow down, you paraphrase, you notice what 90% of people gloss over. And if you do it every single time, even when you're tired or stressed or 2 questions away from the end of the section, that's what separates a 165 from a 175. Not more effort, but better habits. Now, I know everybody's out here looking for shortcuts, drill spreadsheets, timing strategies, Reddit breakdowns of flaw question 27 from prep test 152, but the real shortcut is to master the core skill the test is actually testing. Reading. Precise, focused, and controlled. The kind of reading lawyers do every day, because that's exactly who this test is designed to filter for. You don't need gimmicks. You need to read the words, understand the structure, catch the traps, and trust your training. That's it.